So we left off, I forget where we left off. But anyway, yes, about this cargo cult. Well, I was disappointed because whenever the subject came up, they would just fall silent. They weren't going to have anything to do with talking to me about it or talking to anybody about it. They would fall silent because they had heard about Yali. Yali was a man who quite famous right throughout New Guinea, who Mamba was another, who was a cultist and who had this following, you know. But they weren't going to have anything to do with that. They were satisfied with their own lives. Now, their own lives had changed quite a bit. You see, when they had their big men feasts, when they had got all the taro together and, you know, they exchanged it and so forth, you became a big man if you managed to outdo the rest, and then you became a big man because you'd managed to somehow get more taro on the on the dancing floor, so to speak, because that's what it was. And then you started dancing once you got the taro out on all your produce for the year out there on the on the square. And you were the big man about town. That's what you went for. And to be a big man in European terms, you know, it was a sort of dream away. It's rather hazy for them. But they wouldn't speak about it. They just said, well, you know, you have your ways and we have our ways, and that is that. And we go to the missionary, we go to Mass. We don't know what we're doing particularly, but we go to Mass. And it's only the old men who tell the stories. Now, there used to be men's houses there, but they were there no longer. See, they'd all been smashed or broken up or set on fire, or anyhow, there weren't any men's houses there. And the men's houses were decorated inside by paintings. They drew paintings. And the old men could reproduce some of those paintings, which I reproduced. And there I made, Anne helped me, make cards out of them, you know, but they're my reproductions of what they said it used to look like. And I've got a file here where I show what they had transported onto paper. You see, they would use big pieces of bark to put them on, and all I had was pieces of paper, you know, and they did try to reproduce the coloring and the shape of what they did, and I translated those into something more formal. I've got them here, I brought them in, you can see them. But it was the old men who told me the stories about the Masenier guy who was their hero, you see. He was always doing things. But they were strange stories in many ways. But the younger people said, no, I don't want to know about that, you know. They didn't want them at all. And I've written about that in the other book that I wrote about Tangu, one of the others. I've put the myths there in translation and then analyzed them and showed what they were. Yes. Well, the cargo cults were big-time subject, you know. But I didn't think they were worthy of that. I mean, when you look back in Christianity's history, especially in Northern Europe, we had all these movements, all these Protestant movements, you know, coming off one after the other. And in a way, they were all cargo cults. It wasn't cargo cults that were like them. They were like cargo cults because these poor peasants or these workers in the mills in Britain felt the same way as the natives did, you know. Where do we get all the goodies from, you know? We're going to work now. And they work, but they don't see anything for themselves, you know. Rich people come and buy the goodies and take them away to their big houses. And they have, you know, they're almost cargo cults, but they have this notion of divinity in Europe, which, you know, you can't say magic to. It's not magic. Whereas in a place like Papua, magic is the word, you know. If you can get something like that, good for you. But if you can't do that, I mean, work is going to the gardens, for God's sake. That's what work is. Don't tell me about work, because we know about work, you know, but it's in the gardens. Any other stuff? No, that's not work, for goodness sake, you know. Even today you'll find that working class people in Britain anyway will say, you know, what's your work? What do you work at? You say, well, I'm a school teacher. Well, that's not working. Yes, they do. They still say that. Work means, you know, with your hands, planting or going to a machine and working with your hands. And it doesn't mean reading a book and taking it in and repeating it. That's not work. And work, even today you'll find in Britain people who are working in mills and in factories. If you say, I'm going to work, they'll say, well, what do you do at work? You know, they think of work as with your hands, in the same way as the Papuans do. You know, you do work with your hands. That's work. The rest is magic, and you get all these things coming at you like that, you know. You have some secret somewhere which you can give to us. Just tell us, and we'll get the same things. But they come from heaven or wherever they come from. You get it. Why can't we? We're as clever as you are. But they aren't, I'm afraid. No. So, are we still on? Yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. So, go back to Malaysia, shall we? Unless you want to hear more about Papua?
Well, we can come back later on. So.
Okay. Well, then I went to Malaysia. Oh, yes. I was going to tell you about my first night in Malaysia. This is how not to start. I went in a car. And it so happened that I had to go, I came to the village at night, after dark. It gets dark more quickly there, you know, than here. There's no great twilight zone, you just get dark. And the car suddenly stopped. And I said, what's the matter? And they said, well, there's another car here. And there was a car full of drunks, you know. And one of the drunks was the head man of the village I was going to. They saw my arrival in the village as God sent, you know, because they said, you take him home to his wife, you know, you do it. We can't take the head man. He was, he's absolutely over the top, you know. And then he fell unconscious. So I said, okay. They said, well, put him on your shoulders and take him up the steps. These villages in these, of course, are raised from the ground. They keep the pigs underneath and the livestock underneath the house. And so you have to climb up to the house. And I climbed up the steps with him on my shoulders, this man who was the head man, and knocked on the door. And it was opened by a woman, of course. See, and I said, I didn't know Malay at that time. You know, I had to learn that as well. I said, your husband. Oh, she said, yes. And, you know, she opened the door and said, come in, you know, come. So I put him down on a sofa-like thing, on a couch. And she obviously wanted to be rid of me. Well, she looked after her husband, who is out, you know. So I said, thank you, madam, and left, and went to where I was supposed to be, which was now absolutely new to me. And I got into the bunk and put some blankets on me and went to sleep. But that was the beginning of my Malay field work. But I realized at the time that that was probably not a bad idea if I had thought it out, because next day, you see, when I went out, they all said, you know, they saluted me because I had rescued them as well as the head man. And so nobody was to blame. But the white man had carried the head man up the stairs to his wife. Now this was a tame place, really, you know, Malayan fieldwork. Malays are not like, they're very kindly and, you know, homely and nice people, really, very nice, the real Malays. And so I got on with the field work, you know. What's your name? Who is your father? Who's your mum? Who are your cousins? And so it goes on while you form a genealogical trees. This is the point. This is what Evans Pritchard taught us to do, you know, what the whole of anthropology began to depend on, you know, the kinship problem, the kinship, and the way in which it determined marriage and your children, and you taught them as to who was your mother and who was your mother's brother, because your mother's brother would provide you with a wife. And so, you know, that's how you began to understand the society, was by finding out who was whom and who was your ancestor, who was your father, who was your mother and who was your mother's mother, you know. And they would tell you. And then you began forming these lines and things on a piece of paper. And it was that was the sort of basis of what we called structure at the time. But a lot of people can't be bothered to do that anymore, you know. They just sort of take photographs of the people and say, look at them, you know, they don't learn the language. I learned Malay, I had to learn Malay too. I learned that quite quickly, actually, yes. I'd forgotten all my Tangu by then, or most of it. But I was writing Mambu, started to write Mambu while I was in Malaya. And yes, and then, you know, they could speak English there. Didn't have to go to a pidgin, you know. And so, you know, what they had to say, you'll notice that I haven't written a book about Malaya. I have written a synopsis of what I did, which is in TypeScript, but that's as far as it got. Because at the time, I was all busy with personal matters when my wife decided she didn't want any more of anthropology, you know, and these frequent goings away for long periods of time. And then I had to look after my son, you know. So life changed a lot. So I didn't go too deeply into the Malays, except that they were, of course, Muslims, and that solved a lot of problems, because there's no point in talking about big men and feasts and how did you get here, because, you know, they're all belong to Islam, and so you just learned a bit about Islam, and then it all became clear, and, you know, it wasn't difficult to do field work in Malaya. Once you'd got the point about Islam, and I then had to find a nanny for my son, and we up sticks and went to another place, up country. This one was up the coast, and I found an old house belonging to a Chinese gentleman on the beach. And it was fun because the beach was there, and we go into a wood or a plantation, and there's a house in the plantation. But the sea is just here, you know, and it isn't a very rough sea. It's a nice, calm sea where we were. And that was fun, because the nanny I had found was also a mistress for me, you know. She was a good lass, and we got on very well. And she liked me a lot, and I must say I enjoyed her company, but I didn't want to marry her and have her forever. She wasn't that sort at all, you know. But she was good company while it lasted, and it lasted very well. Thank you. And that really is the sum of Malaya, you know. It was in Singapore. Singapore is a very difficult place to live. It's you have to have money. You have to go a-whoring, you know. There's reality to that word, to that phrase. And I have many friends from those days. They're all dead now, as far as I know. But it was interesting knowing about the Japanese and the way in which the British were outmaneuvered in the jungles and so forth. Because I lived that way for a while, you know. I mean, I was in the jungle. I went into the jungle for a while. And I could see what poor British Tommy was, absolutely floundering in this world, and the Japanese was at home in the jungles, and they always had the drop on a few British soldiers that were there. But anyway, if it wasn't for these sort of personal difficulties with the family, with my wife, I would have been as happy as a sandboy in Malaya. I enjoyed it. And the only black mark there was my relationship with my wife, and that was that. We went into a divorce, and that was that, And I didn't see her again. Never seen her since. Her daughter has been at my son, He knows the daughter, his half-sister. And, well, that's all I can say about Malaya. I went back to Oxford after Malaya with my son, and he said, "Oh, well, we're starting. They've asked me from Iraq if I can recommend anybody for them in the college in Baghdad. Would you like to go, Ken?" This is Evans Pritchett and his friend. So I said, yes, okay, why not? So I went to Iraq with my little friend, Julian, and we found a boarding house, and that was good, It was run by a French lady, and she was very fond of Julian and me, and we had a lot of things together. And when I lectured to all these students, it wasn't field work, but I was interested in their lives, and they were interested in me. And it was the only real things that I found was that in teaching them, you had Muslims and Christian Baghdadis, And when I finished a lecture with a question mark, all the Muslims would lift their hands and say, well, what is the right answer, And I said, there isn't a right answer. You have to work it out. Oh, they said, no. And I said, ask the chap next door. The Christians knew. See, there isn't a right answer. You go on from one thing to another. And that was one thing I did find out about Islam and Christianity. There was a right answer for the Muslims, and you had to know that, and you didn't question it. That was the right answer. If you gave them a problem, which is going to be the right answer, they hated it. They didn't like that at all. Because it had to be either a right answer or a wrong answer. Finished. And so I enjoyed Iraq too, but it was in a different way from enjoying Malaya, although they're same Muslims the same way, but sometimes there's a rather difference, and I didn't realize there was going to be a difference between the Sunnis and the other people. What are they? My memory is gone. What are they called? The Sunnis and the Shias. Shias. Yes. And I didn't realize it then that there were Sunnis and Shias. And I wondered why there was a difference between some Muslims and other Muslims. And it was the Sunni and Shias. And the Shias are always branching out like the Protestants and the Anglicans and all the Protestant sects. And the Sunnis are strictly what they are and nobody else, you know. You can't question it. And this is what a lot of people don't realize, what the troubles are in the Middle East. It all comes down to Sunni and Muslim and Shias in the end. And the Shias are in all sorts of sects, you know, Alawiya and all sorts, yes. But Iraq was good because the French lady was very nice, very hospitable, and I was there for 2 years. But in a sort of indirect way, my friends in the hotel where we used to be, not the hotel, what are those people called? The
guest house.
Guest Anyhow, house. They have a home for people, like the Salvation Army, but it's not quite the same.
Hostel? A hostel?
It's a hostel of some kind. We both met there, and when, just before the revolution happened there, when Hussein came to the throne and was the big man, it happened that I took a leave of absence, and so did he, but he went from Iraq to the US. And from the US he went to Canada. Yeah. But then, when I was in Oxford, they offered me a place in the Pitt Rivers Museum. And that's where I started work, you know. That's where my Oxford, but I didn't have college privileges because I was already, they only dealt with undergraduates, and there wasn't an undergraduate system for anthropology which I could teach, or ethnology.